Ever since I had the heart attack, I haven't.
He's giving you the go sign.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, January 13th, 2020 Selectmen, Highway Commissioners, Cemetery Commissioners meeting. First order on the agenda is rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started, you can see we're short a couple members, but they both are going to be dialed in tonight. So in order to do that, we have to do a roll call vote, right, of members present.
That's right, yeah.
So Chair will entertain a motion to allow remote participation.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Joseph. Second by Mr. Johnson. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote.
Paul Joseph, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Jason Johnson, aye.
So give us 1 minute while we call him in.
Hello, I'm just going to put you on speakerphone.
You're calling Kerry, right?
No, I was calling Mousy.
I got Mr. Siganovich on the phone here.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Carrie.
While we're waiting for two members,
John Marcy.
Oh, John Marcy.
Selectman Mousy. That's Mr.
Got 'em all?
Johnson. You are now live.
I would speak on behalf of the board, but I send out the sympathies for the town. A couple recent losses. Denise Bresney, the wife of former Selectman Charlie Bresney. Charlie served several terms. I think he had a split in there, and he came back. And I remember talking to Charlie when he was on the board, and I wasn't on the board. And Charlie was one of the ones that started the student selectman rep. He gave a lot of time to the town, and we send out our sympathies. I know I speak for the board with his wife Denise, who passed after an illness, to her son Brian. And also, he wasn't really a town official, but he was a de facto town official. He paid attention to a lot of things. He coached. Great sadness to the family of Billy DuPont. Billy passed suddenly, shockingly, I think. Larger-than-life personality. Billy was one of the ones that, first one to give you a pat on the back, pick you up when you were down. Always helped out the town behind the scenes. Didn't want the publicity. And I know I speak for the board with the loss of Billy DuPont and Denise Bresney. Mr. Joseph.
Most people don't know that Billy was instrumental in getting and keeping the Harrington takeover of Hubbard Regional and the Webster EMS. He played a significant role years ago in our fire department ambulance services, and I was shocked and still very saddened. And Billy, wherever you are, keep an eye on us, all right? Because I know you'll give us good advice.
They will be missed.
Yes, they will. First up on the agenda would be acceptance of minutes, the minutes of December 16th, 2019. What is the board's pleasure?
Make a motion to accept the minutes of December 16th and December 23rd.
I second that motion.
And seconded. Any further questions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor state aye.
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 Roll call.
I'm sorry, roll call vote. Sorry,
Roll call.
gentlemen. And I should have deferred to you folks if you wanted to add any comments to Mrs. Bresney and Mr. DuPont.
Well, John Marcy, aye on the motion.
Okay.
And I'd just like to add that any interaction I ever had with Billy DuPont was always amazing. What he did behind the scenes and didn't ask for anything, and he's truly a guy who could walk with kings and the least among us and be a friend to all. Just that type of guy. He
Absolutely.
will be missed.
Gary?
I as well, and yes, I agree with Mr. Marcy. It's a terrible loss. Terrible.
So I'll call the roll call the vote. We have two ayes. Mr. Johnson?
Okay, now this is, just so it's clear, this is on the minutes of the December 16th meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
I said both.
Well,
You want two motions?
I think-
Yeah, I just called for the 16th. We usually do them separate, right?
Whatever the chairman wants. I'd like to revise my motion to accept the minutes of December 16th, 2019.
And I second that.
Mr. Sigenovich?
Yes.
Aye or nay?
Aye.
Mr. Marcy?
Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Paul
aye.
Joseph, aye.
5-0,
Unanimous?
unanimous. Motion to accept the minutes of December 23rd, 2019. What is the board's pleasure?
So moved.
Mr. Joseph?
Second.
Second by Mr. Marcy. Mr. Sigenovich?
Aye.
Mr. Marcy?
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Paul Joseph, aye.
Now we get
So we
that out of the
declare that a
way.
unanimous vote?
Unanimous vote. Next up, we have licenses, P and A, change of officers and directors. Mr. Ruda.
This is a pretty straightforward, completely filled out and accurate bit of paperwork to change the change the officer and director of the P&A Club of Dudley. It's a pretty straightforward vote. Everything's in order, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody here from the P and A like to speak?
This is an annual process that we go through with them. And I'm used to seeing, where am I missing it? The names of the new officers.
It's just one new officer.
Beg your pardon?
Just a
That's
new
all,
manager?
just one?
New manager?
Jim Madden?
Correct.
Okay. And that's the manager.
You have the
Okay.
P-
What section?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move that we,
On the bottom, Eric
It's the new,
DeBona.
it's,
Manager.
yeah, it's there.
it's the new director, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Eric DeBona to replace
Eric DeBona
Alice.
replacing
Okay.
Allison Hennequin.
Okay.
And Jim Madden is still the manager, though. All right.
So Chair will entertain a motion to grant the P and A requests under ABC regulations for a new director, Eric DeBona, to replace Allison Hennequin.
So moved.
Mr. Joseph.
Second.
Second by Mr. Marcy. Any questions or concerns? Hearing none, all in favor, roll call. Mr. Sigenovich.
Aye.
Mr. Marcy.
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Paul Joseph, aye.
Mr. Joseph, aye. Unanimous. Thank you, guys. Made it easy for you. Didn't have to come up or anything. Nichols College, Tuesday, January 14th, 2020, from 7 to 10. Wednesday, January 18th, 2020, from 8 to 11, on the Chamois Quad for ice skating. Mr. Ruda.
Mr. Chairman, Michelle has received and reviewed this paperwork, and it appears to all be in order.
Lynn Luby presenting on behalf of Nichols. Anything you'd like to add, Lynn?
I just want to add that I was hoping to attend the December 30 meeting, which I found out from Michelle had been canceled. So I talked with Michelle and Mr. Ruda about how we contact our abutters, because we're supposed to be contacting them prior to the events. And with the events being tomorrow and Saturday, we wouldn't have had time. So the abutters have been notified. The letter did say pending a vote by the Board of Selectmen at the January 13th meeting. So that did go out ahead of time.
Any abutters here that wish to be heard? Hearing none. Any questions from Lynn Luby? Hearing none. Chair will entertain that motion. We already have it. We have it made in a second yet, or?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Marcy.
Second.
Second by Mr. Joseph. Any questions? Hearing none. Roll call. Mr. Sigenovich.
Gary Sigenovich, aye.
Mr. Marcy.
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Mr. Chairman, prior to my voting aye, could someone repeat the dates of these events again, clearly?
Tuesday, January 14th, 2020, from
Yep.
7 to 10.
Saturday. Scrivener's error.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, Saturday, January 18th, not Wednesday. That was Scrivener's error on the agenda. Second one is Saturday, January 18th, 2020, from 8 to 11.
Okay, aye.
Unanimous.
Thank you.
Got it, Lynn. Next up, appointment resignations. Reappointment, Deb Thibodeau, MIS Director, term to expire 12/31/2020. What is the board's pleasure?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Joseph, seconded by Mr. Marcy. Any questions or concerns? Roll call vote. Mr. Sigenovich.
Harry Sigenovich, aye.
Mr. Marcy.
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Paul Joseph, aye.
Unanimous. Next up, reappointment, James Brinker, Registrar as a Republican, term to expire 3/31/2022. What is the board's pleasure?
So moved, Mr. Chairman,
Moved by-
with pleasure.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Marcy, with pleasure. Seconded by Mr. Johnson. Any questions or concerns? Hearing none. Roll call vote. Mr. Sigenovich.
Harry Sigenovich, aye.
Mr. Marcy.
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye. Mr.
Paul
Joseph.
Joseph, aye.
Unanimous. Next up, public comments, citizen comments. Anybody wishing to be heard not on the agenda that does not require a vote of the board? Seeing none. Town Administrator report. Mr. Ruda.
Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, because we had a pretty aggressive agenda tonight, I've limited my report to just going over the status of our grants. We have a lot of, we have almost 8 grants open right now, or in process in different stages, so I thought I'd just go over that quickly. A cybersecurity grant, the bid deadline is closed. We received 5 bids, and we've chosen True North Consulting Group out of Minnesota. And barring any unforeseen circumstances, we anticipate the contract will be executed and the work will begin at the end of this month. The salary study bid deadline is also closed. We also received 2 bids and sent out notification to the successful bidder today. The bid was awarded to D.I. Jacobs Consulting based on past experience with conducting this kind of work and the bid price. The MVP grant, which is a municipal vulnerability grant, we held a workshop on Friday, which between George Petrinas and Michelle Jervis, they were very instrumental in putting that together. It was a municipal vulnerability workshop, and members of the business community, town departments, local groups, and other stakeholders were here. And we spent the day essentially going over all of the natural hazards that Dudley is vulnerable to, where our vulnerabilities exist. For example, bridges, stormwater management, debris removal, that sort of thing. And based on that, did I say dams? Dams especially. So based on the results of this report and a day's work from those people who participated, and it was upwards of 30, we're going to be in a position where we can now apply for vulnerability action grants to address some of these things. And as the fire chief said, dams. Very important for us to get some money to get those done. We have 2 dams in town that need attention almost immediately. They were recently inspected. They did pass inspection, but it's time. And they're coming with about a $900,000 price tag to address the first one. In the absence of any grant funding, we'd have to borrow or take that out of our general fund, and we are required to address those issues. So the work that was done by the people who participated was very helpful and important for the town's future, especially on the funding side for the town. Our CDBG Housing Rehabilitation Grant, as you remember, that's a grant that we're seeking to, from HUD, that will provide funding for income-eligible residents to conduct necessary repairs on their homes, new windows, new roofs, vital repairs, heating systems, that sort of thing. And there was a great interest in that program. We've actually received 25 applicants. So based on the fact that we haven't received that type of grant in quite some time, for that specific grant, we're in a pretty good shape to be awarded that money. So we look forward over the course of the next year to seeing how that pans out for our town. And we also have a CDGB grant, which is a grant in Jericho, which is a which has been evaluated as a area that's within the income level to receive that sort of funding. So we're going to take a look at the infrastructure in the Jericho part of town and do an engineering review and report on that, and that will place us into a position where we can apply for grant funding from the Action Grant Fund and complete streets and that sort of thing. And speaking of complete streets, I attended the Complete Streets mandatory training at MassDOT on last Thursday, and that puts us in a position where now that I've received that training, we can be in a position to apply for Complete Streets Grant Program, and that's a program that addresses the transportation infrastructure in cities and towns, particularly where traffic calming and controls are necessary, intersections and that sort of thing. We've closed out our Green Communities Grant, which we originally were awarded funding in 2014. As you may recall, we applied the balance of that fund to our streetlight program, our replacement program, and now that we've actually zeroed out the account, the thing that was actually holding us up was that we didn't spend the money, believe it or not. Now we're eligible to move forward with additional green community funding. And I think the first thing I'll be looking to address is to be looking for a survey of the lighting and mechanical systems in all town buildings to see if there's something that we can use or apply towards upgrades for those systems. And then finally, Michelle had applied for a Cultural Commission grant. We were awarded that for $1,000, and that was to update this room that we're in, Veterans Hall, and that was awarded through the Dudley Cultural Commission. And the room will be updated and will reflect the contributions of local veterans to our town since the Revolutionary War, and will provide a snapshot of what was happening in town during those historical periods. And this will be a multi-year project. $1,000 won't cover it, but it'll be a good start for us. And that's our open and active grants overview, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent report. Any questions for the administrator?
Just two quickies.
Mr. Joseph?
On the first two, Jonathan, the cyber and the salary study, were those awarded to the low bidder or the best bidder, or was the best bidder also the low bidder?
Well, as luck would have it, the first one was awarded to the low bidder, the cybersecurity grant. The second one was awarded to the low bidder and the bidder that showed an extensive amount of past experience in conducting those type of studies.
Thank you.
So, okay.
Mr. Sigenovich, Mr. Marcy, any questions for the administrator report?
No, thank you.
No, just excellent job, Jonathan. That's a lot of grants to have in the pipeline. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Just one comment. It's nice to see some of the state money come back into town, and anyone who's doing that due diligence in town it's appreciated. Makes a lot more things happen for a lot less out of pocket for the town. So, thank you.
I want to echo that, too. Paul knows, he's been on the board a little longer than me. We had previous administrators telling us we didn't qualify for things like this. And it's nice to know that either now that we do, and someone's following up on it.
If you recall, a previous town planner told this board that because of our demographics, the town did not qualify for a number of community grants. Nice to see that's not the case.
It certainly is. So we'll just accept the administrator's report for the record. Thank you, Jonathan. Next up, we have an update, memorial for Ken Butkevich. Future meeting schedule with the Dudley Conservation Land Trust.
Mr. Chairman, I just have to, that's actually, I'm going to just cover those real quickly for us, if
Okay.
that's okay.
Yep.
So the board had asked me to, work on a memorial for Ken Butkevich along the rail trail. I just wanted to let you know that we're meeting, Michelle has set up a meeting for people interested in working on that project for Tuesday, January 21st at the Black Tavern, and that will include Dudley Conservation Land Trust and the French River Connection in Black Tavern.
And
Correct.
that's a week from tomorrow night?
Yes.
It'll be a week from tomorrow night,
It's at 10 a.m.
10 a.m.? Okay.
Or tomorrow, 10 a.m., I mean,
Week from
tomorrow at 10 a.m.
It's at 10 a.m.
Okay, that's even better.
So that's in the pipeline. Also, I sent out about a week ago a draft between the town of Dudley and the SEP Dudley LLC, that's the solar project on Oxford Ave, that the town meeting approved for us to move forward with and to authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into negotiations with. And I've worked with KP Law, and we've come up with a plan that I outlined in an email, looking for feedback. I assume if I didn't get too much feedback, that there wasn't a lot of pushback on the proposed plan, and I'd like to direct KP to move forward and present this to the council for the other side.
Any questions for the administrator on that?
I've read this, and it looks like, number one, Jonathan, we've learned from past agreements, pilot agreements with solar arrays. I think this covers every base that I could imagine, and I'm particularly glad to see language in here that protects the town's rights.
Mr. Sigenovich, Mr. Massey?
Nothing.
No, excellent job again. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Johnson, you good?
I'm good.
So
Echo?
without objection from the board, I'll move forward with asking council to engage the other side.
You need that as a motion, or is it just?
Let's do it as a motion. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move that we authorize the town administrator to begin to pursue agreement regarding the finalization of an agreement between SCP Dudley LLC and the town regarding a solar array on, in town. I'll leave it at that.
Motion made and seconded. Any further questions? Hearing none, roll call. Mr. Sigenovich?
Kerry Sigenovich, aye.
Mr. Massey?
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye. Mr.
Paul
Joseph?
Joseph, aye.
Unanimous. Just want to echo what Paul said, and we learn from our mistakes. We appreciate it. 6D, license review of a fee schedule in advance of the Springtown meeting where it will be presented. Mr. Ruda?
Mr. Chairman, I asked Michelle to put this together. We haven't had, for a lot of these licenses, we haven't had a review, we haven't reviewed or changed our fees in almost 16 years. So before I go through the motions of doing a comparison to other cities and towns, see if we're in league with other cities and towns, I can certainly tell you our costs have increased in 16 years to provide these services. But I want to make sure that before I do that, the board wants me to do that, spend the time looking at these fees.
Well, speaking for myself, I have no problem with adjusting a 16-year fee schedule if necessary.
Are these fees listed, Jonathan, your proposed fees?
No,
These are the
these are the
current
current fees. What we'd like to do, and when I say I mean Michelle would like to do, is to see how these line up with other towns, other local towns. And maybe
Mr.
take a look
Chairman,
at how our costs have increased over the course
I'm
of
going
16
to make it
years.
easier for you, and ultimately for us. I'm going to ask that we authorize, I'm going to move that we authorize the town administrator and our executive assistant to provide a recommendation of fees for alcoholic beverage licenses for the town of Dudley, and where necessary, to indicate what data those recommendations are based on, without going into a great deal of detail.
Also, the new and used motor vehicle license too, on second
Yes.
page.
Motor Vehicle Recycling Center and miscellaneous.
Mr. Johnson?
As a second part of that, I'd like to understand how, in some cases, our costs, it's probably pretty simple to see how our costs have gone up. But in other cases, I'd like us to be wary of understanding how the cost of regulating jukeboxes and video games probably has not gone up. So for every cost that we're gonna say has gone up, I don't wanna peanut butter that over to things that obviously we do not look at and should not.
It's going to be largely, Mr. Johnson, operational costs over the course of 16 years.
You got something against peanut butter?
I've got something against a lot of things, but in this case, we don't wanna raise fees on things we don't even look
Okay.
at.
And just as an aside too,
Good logic.
I should probably know the answer to this, and I don't. I just would wonder how he came up with all these odd numbers. 693 as opposed to like 700, 589, 1,005. I mean, there's some,
Both of you have been on the board that long, what did you come up with?
I think that was the year I got elected. I went with the flow back then. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down. All right, so Mr. Joseph has made a motion to have the town administrator investigate fees, and Mr. Johnson would like to add, come up with maybe a justification, is that the right word? Is that okay with the mover?
That's fine.
We're gonna propose an increase, I want justification why.
If that's the mover, you want to be the seconder to that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Johnson. Mr. Sigenovich, Mr. Marcy, you good with that?
I am.
Yes.
Any further questions or concerns from the audience? None? Call to a vote. Mr. Sigenovich,
Terry Sigenovich, aye.
Mr. Marcy,
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye. Mr.
Paul
Joseph.
Joseph, aye.
Excellent. Now we come to the part of the meeting I think most people are home probably waiting for. I welcome on behalf of the board Attorney Brian Riley. He's counsel at KP Law. They're handling a host community agreement with DMA. And tonight we're going to have a status update, discussion of the draft proposal, and then hopefully at the end we'll have a vote to proceed with negotiation and any other action relative thereto. So I welcome Attorney Riley back here again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At this point, I'll just have Mr. Ruda give a brief outline. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Riley. He's going to pretty much take us through. We all had a chance, I hope, to review it. It was emailed out. Mr. Ruda will give a quick outline, and Mr. Attorney Riley will take over. Mr. Ruda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on November 4th, the Board of Selectmen voted to authorize us to enter into negotiations with DMA that proposes a grow and retail facility. Based on that authorization, we secured the services of Brian Riley, who is an attorney for KP Law, who is our town counsel, and KP Law and Mr. Riley have worked on about 50 host community agreements since this began, and we've taken a draft host community agreement that essentially it's 12 pages, but it's fairly simple and straightforward. It provides for a 3% income tax, sales tax, which was voted at the town meeting and authorized by town meetings a year or two ago. I'm not sure exactly which one, but we did accept that provision, and 3% on gross revenue. There are specifics beyond that which Mr. Riley can go over, and I would encourage members of the board and anyone else who's here to ask questions. And just as an aside, the police chief and fire chief have also been involved in this process and had an opportunity to talk to Mr. Riley, or have the opportunity to talk to him further if necessary.
Right.
So,
Mr. Johnson has a quick question.
Mr. Riley, if you could clarify for me, is the current address of DMA Incline Village, Nevada, or in Miami, Florida?
That would be something I need to clarify with our council to make sure all the right names and addresses are in here. The most recent one I have from him is Mr. Villatico in Miami. And Nicholas Adamopoulos is their local counsel here in Webster. There are a couple of blanks to be filled in, real minor things that we would certainly.
Sure, I just prefer there be one address and 2 locations and avoid PO boxes, street addresses and,
Right. Yes, I can certainly take that up with him.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, I'm going to let Councilor Riley begin his presentation. If it's a pressing question, someone feels needs to be answered, I'm sure Attorney Riley will answer it. If we can hold off, if there's housekeeping type questions, we can hold it to the end of Attorney Riley's presentation.
Okay, certainly.
Thank you.
Just very briefly, a bit of background, this law has been around for 2.5 years or so now. And one of the requirements, the state, the Cannabis Control Commission, are the licensing authorities for these businesses, whether it's cultivation, manufacturing, or retail for the marijuana businesses. And so the licensing is all on the state level, but the statute did, one of the requirements before they can even submit their application is to have a host community agreement in place with the city or town where they want to locate. And there's not a lot of details. It doesn't spell out what needs to be in that. It's just the kinds of things that we'll go through, just so both parties feel they're protected and know what's expected of them. About the only provision that's in it is it says that the host community agreement has to be in place, and it has to be in place for every year that they go back to renew their license as well. And the statute in Chapter 94G says that the host community agreement can include a community impact fee, but it can't be more than 3% of the gross sales of the business, and it can't go for longer than 5 years, which means at the end of the 5 years, the two parties need to renegotiate a new one because there still needs to be one in place. And this is designed to go for 5 years. Before going through it briefly, I have had some back and forth with their counsel, who's talked it over with the people at DMA Holdings, and basically they're fine with the format of this. As John mentioned, my office has worked on a lot of these. This is pretty much the format that we're recommending now, and so I was pleased that they didn't have a lot to add to it, frankly. So as I mentioned, the Section 2 of annual payments addresses this community impact fee. The statute says that this is designed to compensate the town for any increased costs from anything that this business has led to. Now, since we're just starting out here, really just starting out around the Commonwealth, nobody has a really good handle on what those costs might be, and you might have new ones that come up after a couple of years. But the company has agreed to the 3% of gross sales of marijuana products at the facilities. And so that's in the agreement. It provides for quarterly payments once they get up and going. And actually, John mentioned the 3% sales tax, which town meeting adopted. That only applies to retail sales, but my understanding is that's the first component of their business they want to get going. That's not addressed in here because that's really a statutory issue. If they sell product, they pay their sales tax to the state, and the Department of Revenue would send back 3% to the town. Very similar to what the hotel and restaurant tax setup is. So the quarterly payments is going to last for 5 years. The parties certainly could come and amend it during those 5 years if they want to talk about that. Let's see. There's there's a section about making some sort of preliminary payments during the first year of operation, when maybe they don't have exactly what their figures are gonna be, sort of prorated payments.
Is that the $10,000?
Right, right. And the community impact fee is separate and above whatever other fees they might need to pay the town for, you know, utility hookups, building inspection, fire inspection, any of those that any other regular business would also have to pay, they would. That's not included. Let's see. There's a couple things about a late payment, so, you know, payments need to be made on time. You'll see there's a paragraph on, well, it's on page 5 of the draft I have, where the DMA Holdings agreed to make charitable contribution to private charities in the town. Now that's very common in most of the agreements that I've seen. These businesses or prospective businesses are very happy to do that. You know, they want to make a good impression when they come into town. And when I brought it up to their council, if the company would be interested in making voluntary charitable donations, because again, this isn't you can't twist their arm to do it. And they came back and said they're perfectly happy to. They were planning to bring it up if we didn't, and they've suggested an amount of $20,000 per year. The charities chosen by the company in its discretion, but after consultation with the town. So you can have a little back and forth on, you know, ones that you would like to see, and they will consider those. There's a provisions for basically financial reports to be filed with the town every year, so you can back up, you know, what their sales have been, make sure that the town's getting the proper percentages. This really isn't anything more than they have to do with the state anyway. They have to very detailed financial reporting to the state, to the Cannabis Commission, and so the town will get copies of those as well. There's a provision that as they're getting up and running, that they will make an effort to use local vendors, local contractors, et cetera. This is a fairly common contract provision. It's not legal to demand that they hire local, but it's okay to, if the company's willing to make an effort, you know, to see if they can find local businesses or contractors that'll suit their needs, and so that's in here. They agree to pay their property taxes. That's in addition to the sales tax we were talking about. This is your regular property tax. There's a section on security and safety. The state regulations from the Cannabis Commission are very detailed and very lengthy on all the security measures that are going to be required here. But this also refers to the company and the police department staying in contact on exactly what the security measures are. If there's any issues, the police are going to know about it. Needing an anti-diversion program, in other words, to make sure that these products aren't going out the door and ending up in the hands of somebody who they shouldn't end up with. There is a section on the community impact meeting, but I understand that's already occurred from DMA Holdings. The statutory requirement was to, you know, kind of hold an outreach meeting so the public could come and ask questions and find out what's being proposed. So they've already done that. There's a, you know, it's kind of reservation of rights for the town that, you know, the business is going to have to comply with any general or local bylaws, general or zoning bylaws, as well as all state statutes, of course, like anybody else. The town agrees to do whatever's needed to support their application to the state. The letter of support or non-opposition, that language actually goes back to the medical marijuana ones, but the town is supposed to submit with the application something which signs off saying, at this location, they're going to be in compliance with the zoning bylaw, that sort of thing. The term, let's see, so there's, they can't, sell the business or assign it to someone else without coming back to the town and making sure the town is on board with that. Let's see, sort of your standard legal contract things. Yeah, if there's any amendments, if they want to make an amendment, or if the town does, it's got to be reduced to writing. Let's see.
And the rest is boilerplate.
It really is boilerplate. The only other one I'd mention is indemnification proceeding. There's a pretty lengthy paragraph on that. And the company would indemnify the town from any claims somebody might make against the town or the town and the company, and cover any costs that the town might incur, because obviously that, again, is a common provision that we always want our towns to be protected from something like that. And so they're willing to sign off on that as well. So a lot of it really is kind of boilerplate contract things. What's different is this community impact fee. And, they're agreed to pay the maximum we're allowed to even ask for. So in summary, this is, I think it's a good agreement for the town. I would certainly recommend it for form. And I think there's very minimal little dotting of i's to do with their council in order to get it ready to sign.
So
If the board's in favor.
before I take questions or comments, I just want to thank Attorney Riley and KP Law. They've been involved with us on this since DMA came in. It was always, I believe, the board's intent to step back during the initial phases, let the experts do what they do. And just to touch on the high points, the 3% is the maximum. The 5-year term is the maximum. The impact fee is the maximum, which they're offering.
Yes.
There's a couple other conditions if they want to change it, they have to come back, obviously, and get permission from us. I mean,
Right.
standard contract. And as you stated, we can't require a percent we can't require, use all local contractors, but they've mentioned it in public, and they've mentioned it to you, that in good faith, they're going to do the best they can.
Right.
And obviously, they will comply with any and all inspections, and there's a section there, too, about financial audits, that the town can request a look at their records to
Right.
make sure we're seeing what we're supposed to be seeing in revenue. I think you hit the high points. Mr. Joseph?
I did have a question, which once I got a copy of this contract through email, my question was answered, but I want to let people know what my question was, because they may have the same question. My question was that, is the 3% community impact fee that we get, is it based on all income? And the reason I ask that question is that the wholesale income is likely to be a much larger figure than the retail income. And the answer is right here in the contract. It says that it's 3% of the gross income without limitation, meaning both. The other thing that I particularly liked is that the impact fee, the cost, and the distribution, which is our business to determine, and then determine how to disperse it appropriately, whether it goes through the general fund of the town and then elsewhere, is, and it's understandably, it's both quantifiable and unquantifiable, meaning that the cost to pay a police detail is known, but the cost to provide some other services may, as of the moment that the contract is signed, be unknown, but that's taken care of in this agreement. And the other thing I like is that they're going to pay for a lot of things that, in expenses that we're going to incur in the course of doing this contract and ironing it out. And that includes your being here tonight
It does.
and the work that you've done on this contract. Both those expenses are reimbursable according to the agreement. So I'm okay with that, for sure. You know, I like it very much.
Mr. Chairman, I would add, since Selectman Joseph brought it up, there was some confusion about whether the town can kind of earmark, no, not this town, but whether communities in general can earmark this money that's coming in for something. And the Department of Revenue put out an advisory which basically says no. Both the sales tax from retail, which would come in from DOR, and any payments under the host community agreement, the 3% of the gross sales, has to be treated as general revenue. So it's, it's going to go in, it's going to get certified, and then town meeting can spend it as they choose. But we can't create a special account for it.
Right.
And certainly, one of the things I'm hoping for is that the town meeting will set aside funds for putting it into the capital outlay account. I don't know if stabilization will fly.
Actually, that is addressed. Thanks. That is addressed in this same advisory from Department of Revenue. That, I guess, is the only exception to what I just said. You can't kind of put it into a account for marijuana payments. But a few years back, the stabilization fund statute was amended to allow you, if you've got kind of a particular revenue stream coming in, you can designate a certain percentage to go into one of the town stabilization funds. So
Now I'm
that's-
even happier.
I believe that must require a town meeting vote to set that up, but that is one option to
I like that.
kind of put a hold on things.
Thank you.
And one more thing I meant to add before, then I'll go to Mr. Johnson. The contingency in here, if local regulations are exceeded by state regulations, they have to follow a more stringent regulation, whichever's more pertinent, right?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned, things like security measures are really detailed, really strict
Right.
on the state regulations anyway.
Excellent. Mr. Johnson?
Just one more question on,
Mailboxes?
no, no, that's gonna be clarified. Yeah, okay. So
Sorry, John.
$10,000 per quarter, says that, is that part of the 3% gross annual sales?
Yeah,
For the first year only.
And does
yeah,
that-
the idea of that is that as they're kind of getting up and going, they may not know per quarter what the payment should be. They're kind of committing to put 10,000 up front. If it ends up they owe the town 20,000, then they would pay another 10. That's
Okay.
that's the purpose of that.
Does that go through the Department of Revenue as well?
No, the payments under the host community agreement is by the company to the town. You have to treat it as general revenues,
This goes right to the general fund.
Right.
Excellent. Good?
How about, I didn't have this question until I saw these license fees. Other forms of entertainment, or distraction, let's call them, within the facility. In this case, it's a coin-operated machine.
I
would they-
could foresee them skating on really thin ice
well,
if they did that in a retail marijuana
It'd be
facility.
bubble gum, for all you know, but are any of those things not allowed per the state law, or is it,
I don't think there's anything expressly saying they're not allowed, but, I mean, certainly in the grow facility and the manufacturing, I mean, that's for employees only. The retail is where you get customers coming off the street, but, I mean, my impression of the ones that are operating now is, they keep it moving.
In and
Once you
out.
buy the product, it's time to leave. They're not setting up. You may recall that when the law was passed, there was a reference to social consumption facilities, basically like a bar where you could go buy the product and stay there and use it. That is, the Cannabis Commission put a hold on that sometime down the road, maybe those will get licensed, but they're not now. And definitely, people can't go to the retail facility and
Later.
take a seat. Exactly. So I don't think anyone's going to be asking for a jukebox, for example.
Get another $20, so,
Could be 40 by the time the fees go up.
no,
You good?
I'm good.
Mr. Marcy?
Nothing more yet,
Mr. Sigenovich?
so far.
It sounds like we're getting the maximum allowable by law. Even if that's the case, we can't do better than the maximum. I'm good with this.
Excellent.
That's correct.
Good point.
Mr. Administrator, anything you want to add?
I don't.
I'm going to open it up to the public, police and fire present. Water sewer, good. Capital improvement, good.
What is it that we're being asked to do now?
So what I'd like the board to do is, through the chair, is to authorize Brian and I to move forward with this draft proposal and formally engage DMA and their counsel to see if this is something that they'd accept. This will be our proposal to them.
So basically, the only changes I've heard is Mr. Johnson would just like Attorney Riley to consult with their counsel, verify the actual address we're going to be dealing with, as opposed to two different ones in the contract.
Yeah.
I think Jay's question begs the question, can we put more than one name and address on this agreement? And have them both, rather than just one or the other?
That's a good question for counsel, but I would think we'd want to have
That's why I looked at it.
one repository for information going to them.
I'm sure that's the plan, them and their local attorney. But that's something that I can pin down with counsel. Get the right name and,
Okay.
the same name that's going to be on the license with the state, that sort of thing.
Unless I'm missing something, that seems to be the only change anybody really wants to pin down.
I don't have a problem with it at all.
Is that correct with the remote participants? That seems to be the only question, right? Just figure out what address we're going to use with them?
Yep, I think it's the only one we heard.
Unless I'm
Yes.
misunderstanding something.
Okay. So with that understanding, how would you like the motion to be worded?
I would ask that the Board of Selectmen approve the draft agreement with DMA as presented and authorize town council to extend the offer to DMA for the host community agreement.
You want the
And I
motion?
guess the next step, Mr. Chairman, after that would be, if they're agreeable to it and agreeable to sign, then the next step would actually be the Board of Selectmen to go ahead and accept the agreement and sign it.
So you want to just have the motion read, agreement presented as of 1/13/20, in case we have just have a starting point on the,
Yeah.
as opposed to no date?
Well, call it what it is. That we're gonna authorize them, both the town council and our town administrator, to move forward with the draft of the proposed host agreement, and then to get back to us. That's with the DMA, and then get back to us before a final copy is approved.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if we just put the date in the motion, that way,
I already did.
yeah. You did?
I put it down. It's on my copy.
It's okay, Michelle. So that was the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Johnson. Any further questions or concerns from the board? Hearing none. Mr. Sigenovich.
Gary Sigenovich, aye.
Mr. Marcy.
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye. Mr. Joseph.
Paul Joseph, aye.
Paul Joseph, aye. Excellent, excellent
Nice
presentation.
job, you guys. Thanks, Brian.
Appreciate it, Attorney
Thank you very
Riley.
much. And, obviously, if there's something substantively changed, we would come talk to you first, but right now, I really don't expect it.
So,
Excellent.
Ryan, without me even having to call you tomorrow, just
I'll
Send it
get in
to-
touch with the attorney
Great.
and tell them, this is the draft we're going forward with, and let them come back.
perfect, thank
Okay.
you.
All right,
Yep.
all right, thanks.
And you
everyone.
got off
Thank you,
light,
Attorney
just so you
Riley.
know.
Much.
Yeah.
Nice job, too.
The two remote people, you guys sticking around, right? Or you got
I actually have to go soon. Who else is remote?
Kerry?
Oh, he is. Oh, I didn't catch that.
I mean, this is rather routine.
And the student representative.
Yeah, and the student rep's not here also, he's not feeling well, but Mr. Johnson will fill in admirably.
Could I ask,
I
Mr.
don't feel well
Chairman?
either, but I showed up.
Mr.
Could I
Joseph.
ask while we still got them? Could items 8A and B be tabled?
Well, let's do the capital improvement first.
Yeah, we have one more, we have item
I
B
just
before
want
we
to
get to...
know,
Yeah.
can A and B be tabled?
Yeah, no, you got it. We're gonna go,
Okay,
we're gonna go to capital improvement program,
yep.
capital improvement committee.
So, Mr. Chairman, to make this as simple as humanly possible, I think everybody has in their packet this 5-year plan, this spreadsheet that the Capital Improvement Committee has presented.
Yes.
So in 2020, prior to the Springtown meeting, we had a capital improvement plan. Wow, stereo coughing. We had a capital improvement plan that went before the Capital Improvement Committee, and they signed off on it and approved it. By the time we get to the Fall Town meeting, some items on that plan, as it often does, had changed. We lowered the cost of borrowing for water upgrades and so forth by almost $1 million, so that's went forward like that at a warrant article on the Fall Town meeting warrant. It passed. The board voted to support these articles as presented at the town meeting. So, why are we here? We're here because the capital improvement plan changed from the spring of 2020 to the fall of 2020 as the engineers took a look at the water issues, and we amended the cost of repairing the infrastructure, doing the engineering and so forth. So, in order to borrow the money, we'd like to get the Board of Selectmen to vote to accept the amended 2020 plan, which is required to float a bond for the money. They want to see that the Capital Improvement Committee voted on it and accepted it, the amended plan, the final plan, including the exact amount of spending that we're borrowing, and the Board of Selectmen have signed off on the Capital Improvement Plan.
Right, and that's strictly
Is
through the bylaw.
that about it?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's strictly through the bylaw. We just have to approve what you guys present,
Right, which we've already approved
Right, we're just gonna
and
re-
supported at Fall Town meeting.
just that the numbers slightly changed.
Correct.
The bond company wants.
Correct.
So any questions for the
Yeah.
Town treasurer
I'm sorry, I
and
understand this.
Mr. Landry? Welcome, Chairman Landry, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The town meeting approved, up on top, under general fund, the amount in black. Did the town meeting approve 539,781? That's the
No,
total.
so a lot of these, when we went to the Springtown meeting, a lot of these articles, as you remember, they were passed over until the fall. We didn't vote on them.
Yep,
And so, for example, okay, the police cruiser, we figured it would cost 50.
I'm okay with
It
that.
cost 51 by the
Bear
time we
with
got,
me.
right.
Bear with me.
Yeah.
My question is simple. The fall 2020 figure
Yep,
is 543,881.
correct.
total. Is that the amount that was approved by town meeting?
No.
What was the amount approved by town meeting?
539,781?
No, you'd go through and net out what was requested for 2019. What we're doing here, Mr. Joseph, the first part of the process is the capital improvement sorts through all of the requests. All of the requests that are deemed positive for the town and within our budget get pushed to the FAA and the Board of Selectmen for their action. Whether or not we have money to spend on them is a moot point. What we're looking to do is take the capital improvement report saying this is what we've authorized for 2020 for the board to take action on. So the answer is I can find what we appropriated the money on. If you take a look at that second column that says status.
Second,
So, for example, Mr. Chairman,
It's updated.
if we look at let's take three, let's keep it simple. Fire turnout gear, 12 sets. We figured when they voted on the capital improvement plan, you'll notice it's 21.5, they figured that would be the cost in the spring. By the time, and that's what they approved in their capital improvement plan. By the time they got to October, the amended amount was 24.6. They approved that prior to the town meeting, and the warrant article number 8 passed at 24,600. So the final capital improvement plan listed fire turnout gear at 24,600. So it's just a matter of the numbers changed before the original proposal. For example, even on a capital improvement plan now, a 5-year plan, we have an ambulance in a couple of years for a specific amount of money.
Yep.
Certainly when we get close to that amount, it's going to be fine-tuned and adjusted. So we have a voted upon 5-year plan that says one amount. By the time we get there, it's going to change, and they're going to have to vote on that amount again.
Okay, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that the people at home who are watching this or who will see it, I want to be sure that they understand that the current figure, excluding the enterprise accounts, the current figure needed is $543,881. Is that correct?
That's what the Capital Improvement Committee approved
Correct, for the general fund
for
amount.
for fiscal year 2020.
Okay, so that's what the Capital Improvement Committee has approved. My question is that figure subject to a vote by any town meeting?
Some have already taken action on it.
Right, but I think what he's saying is, if you look in that original column, the difference of the 4,000, because some of those warrant articles were worded source of, you know what I mean, it would say cost, source of funding, borrow, whatever, so we don't have to go back to town meeting and adjust that $4,000.
The short answer is no. The town meeting approved what it's going to approve in the 2020 capital plan. I think we withdrew, for example, the fire supply hose. I think that appeared on the capital improvement plan, but as noted, it was withdrawn and it didn't go through the town meeting.
All right, let me get
We're
to
just
the,
voting on the plan itself.
let me tell you why I'm asking. That's always helpful. I don't want this board to be asked to approve any figures that require town meeting approval that have not yet been approved by town meeting.
Correct.
That's
May-
pretty simple.
The only request
Maybe
is
we
to-
need, maybe we need to explain this a little differently. The Capital Improvement Committee is the first step in any appropriation. So the chairman will take everyone's submission, water, sewer, highway, police, everyone. We're going to truncate that down to what's absolutely needed with the budget parameters given by the Board of Selectmen. This is the report to the Honorable Board of Selectmen saying, this is what we anticipate for the upcoming year.
That's the capital improvement.
Correct. You're
Okay.
not being asked to, I know what you're saying. You're not
Right.
being asked to vote
It's
on
not
anything but
It's
a
not an
plan.
obligation,
Okay.
It's a
it's an
plan.
acceptance of the
Right,
report.
this is what you guys are gonna present on town meeting floor. This will become, the stuff that's not already been approved or budgeted will be part of the plan going forward,
Correct.
assuming we give it a positive vote tonight.
Well, no, it's actually been already,
Right, but the adjusted figure.
it's the adjusted figure,
Right,
right.
you're
This
just
is
looking for
only
the
a
adjusted
plan that
figure.
we're voting on.
It just seems a little awkward.
Because we've never done the correct procedure before, but now that we're asking to float a bond, we're now here trying to backpedal our way, to be completely frank, into an approved 2020 capital improvement
Okay, are we
plan.
gonna go through this process again?
We're going to go through it, but following the same, we're going to do this before we actually get it
Looking for
voted
a
upon,
bond.
right?
Okay,
Yeah, next time we'll have the adjusted.
Which is
correct
why we
figure.
had a capital
Okay, so
improvement
this
grant
particular
to help us
process
get through all this
it's a
stuff.
betweener process.
Reasonably, it should have,
Between the way we used to do it and the way we're gonna be
It's a
supposed to be
transition, let's look
doing
at it that way,
It's a tweener.
into doing it the correct way.
Continuous improvement?
Yeah, sure,
Right, like the administrator said, this is a
Yeah.
part of the benefit of the grant that we had,
right.
that they came in and worked with the capital improvement plan to help streamline, backfill, backpedal.
I'm glad you appreciate the value as much as we're not following the chart specifically. There's a great deal of savings here. There's a great deal of making sure things are optimized, so
Correct.
it's appreciated.
So you would like us to take a motion to accept the capital improvement plan dated 1/9/2020 as presented with the adjusted
I
figure?
think that'll work.
It will.
Chair will entertain a motion to that effect.
Mr. I can get away with so moved.
Mr. Johnson moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Multiple seconds. Any further questions or concerns for the capital improvement committee? Hearing none. All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
Oh, roll call. I'm sorry. Kerry.
Gary Singanovich, aye.
Mr. Massey.
John Marcy, aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Jason Justin, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Paul Joseph present.
Paul Joseph present. 4-0-1. Not unanimous.
Doesn't have to
It
be.
passed.
The
We're good.
majority passed.
Still passing.
And I'm going to do a quick editorial. I served on that capital improvement board, and if there's citizens out there that want to get involved, that's a good committee to get involved with. Those folks, they don't meet all the time, but they meet often enough.
Well, they're
where-
gonna have to roll up their sleeves, Mr. Chairman, going forward, because there's a lot of
Yeah, stuff coming
changes
up.
coming down the pike with capital
Right, but
improvement.
that's a good board. If we
Yeah.
have people that want to volunteer their time to the town, I'm sure Chairman Murphy, Landry and the town treasurer would gladly take your name and make sure you're sworn in, so
If I
please
may,
consider it. Mr. Joseph.
I just want you to know, it's not required, but I voted present rather than aye, because I want to see what this becomes when it grows up, this process. And I'm not there yet. So I don't oppose it, but I want to see where it goes.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
New business, 8A, Fire Chief, Fire and EMS.
Mr. Chairman, I have to step away and go back to my team, but thank you all. I appreciate
At this,
dialing me in.
at this
Take care of
point,
yourself, John.
yeah, on behalf of the board, I thank Mr. Massey for taking time to dial in tonight. We appreciate it,
Of
John.
course, no problem. Thanks, guys.
Kerry, you still good?
I'm still good. My only team is a box of tissues. I'm fine.
I could think of something, many things funny to say, but I appreciate you calling in. So, next up, Fire and EMS.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I do wish to table 8A until the meeting on the 27th, because I'd like the whole board here.
Yep.
That being said, I did put in your packet a cover letter and a simple spreadsheet explaining this. I think at some point I've talked to every member of the Board of Selectmen regarding this issue over the past year. I just want to really quickly, it's a simple spreadsheet. I just want you to read it from the top across. You have a couple weeks to review it. Is the whole top portion is like budget. All I'm doing is moving budget lines around. So there's no increase to my budget. And the bottom is the increase in ambulance receipts and benefits. And you have 2 weeks to review it, and we can come back at it on the 27th.
Right, and you're, a couple of things real quick, Chief. Your increased profit receipt at the bottom, that's only year-to-date. That figure's only gonna change.
Yeah, I was gonna speak on that, so I didn't have to come back up in departmental communications if I can spend a couple seconds on
Right,
that.
and then I just want to state, as part of this reorganization to go to 24-hour shifts, essentially you're going to eliminate a whole division of your department. You have your call EMT.
Right, I don't wanna get too in-depth to it.
No,
Just
but
look
people at home are going to be like, what are they talking about? So
Right,
just make it simple,
I'll be eliminating some positions, but
not
I
professional.
don't wanna get too much into it, because we are tabling it. I just wanted to make you aware of how to read the spreadsheet, so you have a
Excellent.
couple weeks to review it, which I know makes certain people very happy. And, and then, we can come
Including
back
you.
at it the 27th.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move that we table it formally, which would then bump it up to whole business for our next meeting.
You good? You nothing else you want to add at this time?
No, I just wanted to speak
Okay.
on ambulance receipts if I could real quick, so I don't have to come back up here, but if I have to wait, that's fine too.
So we have motion to table, which does not require a second, and as long as the board is in agreement, it just goes to the next meeting.
Okay?
Next meeting. Chief, go ahead and do your...
So I don't know if you read my report this morning, but I was actually pleasantly surprised that I did speak on this at the last Selectmen's meeting, and I see the Webster Times picked it up, which kind of surprised me. Must have been a slow news week. But we are up $108,000 over last year, and in my monthly report, I actually put last year's ambulance summary report in as a comparison. I don't know if you all read it. So it actually shows the difference between FY19 and FY20, and I just wanted to point out that this is the most significant increase, I think, in revenue that this department's ever had, to the best of my ability, as far back as I can go, as far as a increase. I mean, it's even more than I projected when I came up and spoke at that last meeting. I know things can change over the last month and over the last 6 months, and we could have a slow couple of months, but the way it's trending, we could get a couple $100,000 in additional funding through the ambulance, so I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Excellent. Thank you. Any questions for the chief?
I'll just comment between, grant money to pay for things that need to be done and increase revenue, start of a good year. I don't know what's coming up next.
That's right there.
Oh, part of it's restructuring your fees too, you stay on top of that.
And the other thing that I haven't even brought up, I haven't really looked into, we've restructured fire fees. Now, I know that's not as much of an increase, but I've increased a few of those fees significantly in the 9 years I've been here, and so there has to be an increase in that line. I could research that as well. I'd have to talk to Debbie, but I mean, I'm sure it would be easy to pull those numbers up too. But I mean, our inspections have increased and the fees have increased, so there has to be an increase there too.
Is that increase based off increased cost to do the task?
I based it back before you were on the board. I did it at the request of the board because I actually did a study of like communities in the area and some similar communities out of the area and what their fee structure was. And when I first became chief here, our fee structure was extremely low. So I kind of brought it up to what the industry standard is, if you want to call it that.
Right, but once again, it hadn't been revisited for a number of years.
Right.
It's kept us out.
Sorry, I always ask my questions, what's it cost to do the task? And then what's the markup or to put away? So I understand. We keep going back and talk about stuff like that. But I'm just looking at what's the cost to do business and what are we going to charge and why? So.
Oh, no, that's a good question.
And through you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Johnson, when I mean like communities, I go by the sheet that's structured, I believe it's through Mass Municipal Association. The sheet gives like 9 types of communities, and all the communities in the Commonwealth are listed. So I find a list that has Dudley in it, and all those communities that are listed in the same row are communities like Dudley. So you're actually comparing apples to apples. And now I think we're pretty much in line. I mean, it's been a few years since I did the fire ones, but I think we're pretty much in line with what those communities are doing as far as a fee structure and what the rate is.
Mr. Joseph?
Yeah, I'm not saying this is the case with what the chief is talking about, but in 16 years, it has been my philosophy that you don't raise fees because you can. You raise fees because you need to. Let's always just keep that in mind.
Any further questions for the chief? Mr. Siganovich, you good? He's good.
Yes, I'm good.
All right, so we're going to table your requests for next
Thank
meeting.
you.
Next up, Chief Wayne, Police Chief. Similar.
Well, Mr. Chairman, yeah, similar request to the fire chiefs, yes. I've been having some discussions with the administrator, and I could table this off to the next meeting as well to get more information and get it in front of the full board to discuss that important subject. So I can ask the board to table that as well.
So I move to table the police chief's request, and it'll show up as old business in our next meeting.
Any objection from board members? We'll just table it and bring it up at the next meeting.
Mhm.
So moved. Next up, Chief, while you're sitting there, Police Chief clarification of holiday pay in the CBA amendment section. Mr. Ruda.
The chief can go over the initial issue that needed to be clarified. This is a clarification of language that exists within a CBA in terms of the use of vacation time and super vacation time, super holiday time, and how it can be applied, when it can be applied. This is existing language that needed to be further clarified, and the chief can kind of review what the issue was that brought that forward.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the last round of negotiations, and it was approved to designate 4 specific holidays, basically as like what they would call super holidays or special holidays, and that was New Year's, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. And so obviously this was the first time we were going through that, and there was some questions about individuals who elect to take days off versus getting paid for it. And so I had, based upon the spirit of the negotiations from the last time, I had discussions with the union about this. And so we were able to work it out and clarify the activity. So basically what this is that it applies to individuals who actually work on the holiday itself. Will be eligible for the pay. If they elect to take a day off at some point, whether they would not be eligible for the pay. That's just the way it would go. So basically, the state keeps it similar to the other holidays as we treat them. So it does give the benefit to those individuals who do actually work on the holiday itself. So I think all the board would really need to do is just vote to accept this change, and what we'll do is we'll incorporate it into the full agreement, and just have the board at the next meeting sign the full agreement again, just with the amended change.
So, Chief, Section 1 highlighted in yellow, if they work, they get paid, but they get an additional day off later.
Well, correct. See, what happened was just to clarify, so that, for example, we were going to pay extra for the holiday itself, but it was not designed for individuals who were going to take a day off, because that would essentially do is you'd get paid double time, but then also have another day off up the line to go with it. And the problem with that was basically kicking the can down the road. So if you get, for example, it was the Thanksgiving holiday, so everybody would be getting paid their extra money according to the contract for that. However, now if everybody decided to take Friday and Saturday off, we're going to have the same problem that we would have had on Thanksgiving, is trying to fill all those shifts and paying overtime and everything else for it. So this was specifically designed to incentivize the individuals to actually work the day and not provide any additional days off for that would be subject again to time and a half pay.
So the new language is strictly does away with that extra day off. They still have that.
Yes, that's why it takes away any individual. They can still choose that if they wish. If they still wish to take that day off up the line, they can still do that, but they would not be eligible for the extra pay. That's the way that works.
Okay. Any questions for the chief?
I got one.
Mr. Johnson?
Any projected cost increase or budget issue by doing that?
No, actually, I think this does save it, because it's one of the things where you're looking at it, you're eliminating that possibility of having to fill additional days off at overtime. So, for example, if I have 10 people scheduled to work on all 3 shifts, potentially that could be 10 extra days off I'd have to fill. And I'd still be paying for, several individuals for some additional pay on that purpose. So this way, it basically it pays the individuals that work that day at a one-time shot, and then we eliminate any of those additional days off that have to get taken. And we're treating it similar to as we do with shift differential. You actually have to work the day to get the pay. If you don't work, you don't get paid.
Good. Mr. Joseph?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move, I hope to clean this up a bit. I'm going to move that the board approve this document dated January 6th, 2020, from the police chief as a memorandum of agreement, an MOA, effective the day before Thanksgiving Day 2019. And the reason for that is that it was a guide, and we want to legitimize that it was a guide that was used for Thanksgiving and Christmas of this past year, and this legitimizes it having been done. And it should not be an amendment as much as it should be an MOA instead of an amendment to it, because it's after the fact.
I'm not sure I understand. I mean, it's backdated to before the last two holidays?
Yeah, a memorandum of agreement, which can be done at any time, and have it become effective retroactively to the day before Thanksgiving, 2019, when in fact, using this as a guide, which had not been approved, the new policy was in effect used for the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays.
Bless you.
So the new policy, the clarification to the policy was already used the last three holidays?
It was used Thanksgiving and Christmas prior to our approval
Or New
as a
Year's.
guide.
And New Year's.
So just to legitimize that was what was done, we can't do it post-actively as retroactively as an amendment, but we can do it retroactively as a memorandum of agreement. I just want to make it clean and neat.
Well, we have a motion, but do not have a second yet.
Okay,
Second.
somebody come up with a
Second
good
by Mr.
idea.
Johnson. So is that what happened, Chief? It was already handled that way?
Yes, we had to have discussions about it, and the fact is the board was also not meeting at those times. We had, one issue came up with Thanksgiving, and as we were having discussions about it, it would have come up after your last meeting prior to Christmas, so I would have brought it up at the meeting then, but we didn't have anything accomplished. And then with the fact that there was no meeting on the 30th, I could not get it done, especially before New Year's. So this was basically the guide that we followed at the time, as it was, again, mutually agreed upon between myself, I discussed it with the administrator and the union representative.
So it affected three holidays then? Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's?
We met
Yeah, the
prior.
16th.
We met a bunch of times in between all those holidays.
Yeah, we met the 16th of December.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we just.
Well, the issue came up with Thanksgiving, and so it was after Thanksgiving that we had the discussions on that, and we really didn't have any type of agreement in place until after I think your meeting on the 16th or something like that. Yeah, we didn't engage in any type of formal agreement, at least until that time, to rectify the situation.
So I guess the simple question is this okay, Mr. Administrator? To take a motion to backdate to,
No, we're not backdating. We are making it retroactive. We're taking this memorandum of agreement,
Well, do we have any,
January 13th, but we're making it retroactive to Thanksgiving of 2019. Now, it would have been a lot easier if people had held their water and not done this on Thanksgiving and Christmas, but they did. And that was done extra contractually and not in any agreement approved by this board. You can't let that go unanswered. That's not right. It's not proper.
so,
So you got to clean it up.
so let me understand, Mr. Chairman, we have a liability because this was done incorrectly? Previous to this wording coming forward,
No, I think what happened was there was some dispute as far as how it was to be applied.
Yeah,
I think because it was a brand-new provision of the contract. I interpreted it one way, the union interpreted it another way. And so we had discussion about it to clarify it, and we just clarified the language with this. So no one was denied any benefit, no one was denied any pay, everything was done with agreement. It just has to be formalized since the board is the final say on contracts. The board just has to adopt this to incorporate it into the agreement.
so, but is the point of contention that we did not do this appropriately previously and we're clarifying it now? I'm only asking that because if we backdate something Does that mean that we're going back after, we have to recover unpaid
No,
money
there's
that was
nothing we have to
incorrectly
recover,
paid?
no. No,
Okay.
no, nothing have to
All right.
recover.
I'm trying to speak for anybody, but is the question, was it done arbitrarily without,
No, I don't think it was done arbitrarily. I just think it was done impatiently. And because it was not even run by this board, run past the board, where we could have had a special meeting or taken a vote at an earlier meeting, it would have to be applied as a memorandum of understanding retroactive. We're
Well-
not changing the contract retroactively. We're approving what was done for Thanksgiving and Christmas because that was done inappropriately.
Well,
we are changing it because we're being asked to revise and agree upon a new section 2, so we are
So-
changing.
So
But it's
I can
already been
speak, I can
implemented.
speak to that, Mr. Chairman, certainly if I did something inappropriately, because the chief and I did speak about it, we both interpreted the spirit of the contract to mean exactly this. The only purpose for this is to further clarify the contract. In other words, the wording wasn't clear, so there were two misinterpretations. So having two conflicting interpretations, the managers made the decision that this is the way we interpret the contract, and this is the way we're going to enforce it.
And now you're correcting the
And now
language to be
all
more
we're
clear.
doing is making the language clearer. We're not trying to change anything that we didn't believe existed to begin with.
Well, I certainly believe in,
I wouldn't mess with collective bargaining agreements if all three parties agreed to it. It's a
Oh.
dangerous precedent. I wouldn't do it.
well, I
Wouldn't do it.
I certainly agree with letting the managers manage, but I think the course of action should have been, I know you're saying it's misinterpreted, but we have management rights. We should have interpreted it the way we want and let the union come back and say, we
So
disagree.
if a union member came to a manager and said, I interpret it this way, and the manager says, no, this is the way, was the intent of it, how it reads to me, and we're gonna, if there's a problem, we'll further clarify.
Union member is not
Right, gotta get
party to the collective bargaining agreement. It's their union and our management,
Right.
not an individual member. That's weak.
Well, that was the discussion that we had, though, Mr. Chairman, for clarification purposes, and the administrator is correct. Since this was a new provision of the contract, and I was in negotiations with the previous administrator when this was taking place, so I was familiar with the conversation and the discussions that had taken place there, so that was my discussion with the president of the union to clarify this. And so that's all we did, was clarify the language.
It was all done for good intent. And it's a good idea. But you did not vote. You're not a party
Correct.
to the contract. You did not vote. You're not a party to the contract. Neither one of you had the authorization to put that into effect until one or both parties that were party to the contract agreed to it. We weren't even notified. That's all I'm saying. It's a no-no. You don't do that.
I interpreted this, Mr. Chairman, to mean exactly what it says here, that this was a pre-existing condition, pre-existing term in the contract, and it needed further clarification and nothing more. I didn't think we were adding or negotiating. I thought we were proposing to clarify through an MOA language in the contract that was confusing.
The difference of opinion is healthy.
So what's the end result?
Continue with the
The new revised section?
It ought to be cleaned up, in my opinion. If the board chooses not to, I
we happy
don't
with that
mind being a
language?
short end of a vote.
We happy with the language Paul proposed?
Only as an MOA, not as an amendment.
Gary,
Yes?
any feeling on that?
If it's an interpretation of a bargaining agreement, I don't understand why we'd have to change it, or I'm wondering if there are any ramifications of changing it. I know Mr. Joseph said something about all parties coming together to change an agreement. I want to do the right thing, but I don't want to do the wrong thing. That's where I'm at.
I think the end result is gonna be where we want to be. I think the question of my concern, I think your concern is how we got to where we're at.
Well, I'm okay, they made a mistake. And I say that with two dear friends. You made a mistake. You shouldn't have done it like that without letting us know that in fact it was in the works. You didn't do it. The intention is right, the language is correct, but you're asking us to accept something that's already been in place since last Thanksgiving, November of 2019. All I'm saying is, we can't amend the CBA without going through a vote of the board and the vote of the union. However, if both parties agree to a memorandum of understanding, you can retroactively apply it. You can't change the contract retroactively, but you can retroactively apply the agreement that our managers and a representative for the union agreed on. It's not as harmful or as severe an action, an MOA, as amending a contract retroactively.
Right.
If we approve this, is there further action with the union, or just ends here?
I don't believe there will, no, because they've accepted this, so
So do we wait for them to sign and bring it to us, or we sign it and bring it to them? That's the question, because if they brought it to our attention, aren't they supposed to address it
If
with
we
us?
no, if we vote to do it as an MOA, which is extra contractual, all right? And they agree to it as an MOA, then it can be attached to.
Who signs first? Do they vote first and bring
Makes
it to
no
us?
difference, no,
Doesn't
either one,
matter.
either party can initiate an MOA.
Because
And I
they
can sign
initiated
the
the complaint,
MOA.
that was my question. We didn't initiate the complaint, they did. They went to the chief didn't
Was
go to
it a
them.
complaint?
there was a potential grievance that was averted.
So they should be proposing it to us, as
Wait,
opposed.
well, no, if we see something wrong that should be corrected, we can suggest an MOA. It doesn't have to be an offended party, all right? An MOA is more extra collective bargaining, extra contractual than amending a contract.
And the language is proposed that that's before you has been agreed upon by the union as well, so.
I mean, I know for me it's a no-brainer, only because of too many years, 20-some-odd years of union negotiations. But if you think about it, it's logical. It's logical to do it MOA-wise. Again, I don't want anybody to have a birthday before we decide, nor do I want people to miss the national championship football game.
Michelle, can you read
I
back-
don't have a problem losing a 3-1 vote.
Can you read back the motion?
Paul Joseph motion that the Board of Selectmen approved the document dated 1/6/2020 from the police chief as an MOA, effective date before Thanksgiving Day 2019. Jason Johnson.
Yes, and I second.
You good with that?
Yeah.
Carrie, you good?
I'm good.
Call for a vote. Roll call. Mr. Sigenovich.
Gary Sigenovich, aye.
Johnson.
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Paul Joseph, aye.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the confusion.
That's my agenda.
We know you guys won't do that again.
I don't even know what I did to begin with.
Next up, Brian LeBrecq, Economic Development Committee, updated. I believe we're all good with that. Board of Health looking for permission to use Clarinda Wood Fund for
So
$1,400.
moved.
Second.
Motion made and
I'm
seconded.
sorry, $1,440. I should let you at least state the amount.
It says $1,400 on here.
$1,440.
Is that an amended, he has an amended agenda?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It says
Oh,
$1,440.
yeah, but on the agenda it says 14. Scribner's error, 1440. All in favor? Mr. Sigenovich.
Gary Sigenovich, aye.
Mr.
Jason
Johnson.
Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Paul Joseph, aye.
Unanimous. ABCC 2020 Seasonal Population Increase Estimation Form. Must be signed by the board. What is the board's pleasure?
I move we sign it.
Motion to sign. Seconded by Mr. Sigenovich. Roll call vote. Mr. Sigenovich.
Gary Sigenovich, aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Jason Johnson, present.
Stephen Sullivan, aye.
Paul Joseph, aye.
It's a three-
So,
You're learning.
30-1. Mr.
can I
Rutter.
clarify?
Yeah, rush me through, I have no idea what it is.
So I asked, don't worry, I asked Michelle the same question. Apparently, the ABCC has to certify our population to identify whether or not
Licenses.
we can issue seasonal licenses, like if we were down at the Cape or something.
Right.
We don't meet the criteria, all we're doing is certifying our population
We never
according to
have.
the
This is
ABCC.
Now,
Correct.
Mr. Chairman,
It's a pro forma vote we do every year.
it's a point of information for Mr. Johnson. Now that you know what it's about, you can ask for a change of vote.
Should I change my vote,
Oh,
please?
you didn't vote in the affirmative, though. Only in the affirmative you can vote.
No, he didn't vote in the negative either.
It-
He voted
I don't
present.
care. Mr. Johnson, would you like to change your vote?
Does it require? Yes,
Make it-
can I change my
Would
vote?
you like to change to a yea or a nay?
Yay.
Roll call, Mr.
Jason
Johnson.
Johnson, yay.
400. Departmental Communications, Fire EMS, PD.
Just one piece of information, we got word, we got the contract sent to us today, but we actually got word that we received an earmark in the state budget for $100,000 to replace our base radio downstairs, so that's all
Really?
been approved, the town's received the funding, contracts were just received, so that, we'll get that project going as soon as we can get that.
And I
It
don't,
was a good day.
I don't want to open a can of worms. That was listed on the capital improvement plan, but obviously it's been taken off.
It was, yes.
Thank you. Good, good, good,
Don't
good.
ask capital improvement.
Good, good. Water sewer. Mr. Petrinos, presenting.
Real quick, meter reading has started, so again, to the public, you see people wandering around looking like they're lost or something. It's probably one of our guys. Should be completed this week.
Excellent. Anybody got anything else they'd like to add?
No selectmen's comments?
Selectmen comments, Mr. Joseph.
None.
Oh, wait, we have student report.
Student report, Mr. Johnson presenting on behalf.
Get well, Al, I'll read it for him. Student report, midterms around the corner, teachers are starting to review with kids, so put the Xbox down and study hard. I'm sorry, that's my comments. Central Mass Show Choir Festival is happening the 31st of January. The 1st of February, tickets are on sale on the show choir's website. Winter track competed at the Reggie Lewis Center last weekend and did well as usual, and basketball is in full swing as well.
Accept the report as presented. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Made second. Roll call. Mr. Sigenovich.
Gary Sigenovich, aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Jason Johnson, aye.
Stephen Sullivan, present.
call you
Paul
after.
Joseph, aye.
Present.
Thank you.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you, Kerry.
Thanks, Gary.